Oh, hello there. My name is Jeff Stacy. I'm just sitting here, enjoying the fire, reading through the North Shore News. This is a local paper from North Vancouver that's delivered to my house a few times every week for free. It has all the usual trappings of a newspaper and covers everything from sports to opinion pieces to classifieds to community, gossip, politics, and even international news. I really enjoy taking some time every now and then to catch up with what's going on in my community, but more than anything, I enjoy reflecting on the history of the newspaper all the way back to the penny press and what it means in terms of education and literacy today. The very concept of reading publicly posted news is not, in fact, new. In Europe, as early as the 16th century, material was being printed and distributed with financial news, gossip, and so on. In the New World, however, in the year 1833, a man named Benjamin Day made newspaper history. He ushered in the modern concept of the newspaper with his penny press, and arguably, the world has never been the same. While Mr. Day may have just been looking for a way to pay the bills, his penny newspaper would have wide-ranging effects that even he never could have dreamed of. From high-paid sports stars, to modern CNN-style minute-by-minute reporting that often gets things wrong, to the proliferation of advertisements on almost any surface possible. The penny press has had a dramatic impact on news, reporting, and even modern Western civilization itself. These may seem like outrageous claims, but in the next few minutes I will first go over the history of the penny press and why its success was, in some ways, inevitable. Then I'll show you, based on its success, why these claims are not totally unreasonable. In the early 19th century, if you were living in New York City, there were a number of newspaper options available to you. Most, however, were only available by annual subscription at a cost of about $4 per year. Put into today's terms, that would be about $65 per year. That's more than 5 times the cost of a yearly subscription to National Geographic today. While that may not sound overly prohibitive, it was in fact quite restrictive to many people at the time. There had been other daily 1-cent newspapers available since about 1830, but once Benjamin Day started The Sun in 1833, everything changed. And here's why. He published articles that appealed to a wider range of people. He published articles directly targeted to the new booming immigrant population. He sold advertising rights. He sensationalized stories. And rather than only selling through stores, he put newsboys on the street that peddled the paper to pedestrians. Put this all together, and what do you get? A successful paper that will eventually change the way we learn about the world around us. Just look at what we have here today available for free, let alone $4 a year. All these papers are catering to various different needs and paid for by advertising. Almighty advertising. So let's start with that. Advertisements were one of the ways the penny press newspaper was funded. By selling advertising spaces to businesses, publishers could rely on revenue outside of the limited scope of subscription fees. In fact, this central idea was actually the motto of The Sun, and it read, "The object of this paper is to lay before the public at a price within the means of everyone all the news of the day, and at the same time offer an advantageous medium for advertisements." This motto was in fact printed at the top of the very front page. On the surface, this motto and the entire process of advertising in the newspaper seems like a reasonable and sensible way to drive costs down. There were in fact some unintended consequences that were less than ideal. First of all, advertising revenues often caused editors increasingly to view newspapers in commercial terms. As a result, a feedback loop began to develop. Newspapers began to find ways to make the news more exciting so that people would buy more newspapers, so that advertisers would pay more, and so on and so on. In this way, it was not hard to see how the quality of news began to degrade. Over time, reporters and journalists began to actually question their craft, and reform gradually came to the industry, but not before the damage had been done. Advertising is now a persistent and constant force that has crept into almost all aspects of our lives, but it was actually the penny press and others that first set about unleashing such a beast. From billboards to race cars plastered with ads to even the boards in hockey, we are hit with advertising everywhere we go. In fact, we are now facing a time where advertisers have found a captive audience even with our students. The problem came to a head with the penny press newspapers when readers couldn't differentiate between articles and ads, and now it is coming to a head in our classrooms, where it is not just posters in gymnasiums anymore. For example, some corporate donors provide curriculum materials with either subtle or even explicit references to their products. It has become a problem, I think, that in some communities children use mathematics worksheets with Disney characters, and when they're done, they get to see clips from the video as a reward. Just like the penny press, the surface argument seems fairly benign. School boards are chronically underfunded, and with a little help from the business world, schools can effectively meet their bottom line. But exclusive rights with certain companies and so on just aren't that big a deal, are they? After only 2 years, the Penny Press ran an article that talked about life on the moon. It was written, in fact, as a piece of satirical fiction, but was mistakenly taken as fact. But with such wide distribution, the story became quite difficult to correct. After that, scores of sensationalized truth-stretching articles and ideas showed up in penny presses and did two main things. First, they eventually inspired reporting reformation in about 1860. But second, they sold lots and lots of papers. People loved them. Beyond these tabloid stories, there were also mistakes that were printed, but since distribution was so vast and so prolific, setting the record straight became extremely difficult and problematic. Now, more than 150 years later, we're going through the same growing pains. With global reporting and instant communication, not to mention social media, mistakes, misinformation, and sensationalized stories get passed on quickly and are difficult to contain. For example, in 2012, both CNN and Fox News mistakenly reported that the U.S. Supreme Court had struck down the U.S. Affordable Health Care Act as unconstitutional. In fact, this was entirely false, but a CNN reporter had initially misinterpreted the facts, and Fox had used CNN as a source. Within hours, the story had been shared and tweeted by thousands of people thousands of times. So, what's the modern problem with students and education? The problem is that students have access to a fantastic array of unverified, terribly inaccurate information at their fingertips. Anecdotally, I have witnessed middle school students doing current events presentations with information that is so invalid it makes their entire presentations essentially meaningless. But middle school is not where it ends. In fact, numerous articles and studies have found that even university students do not necessarily have information literacy skills to find authoritative information and then to evaluate the information for use in their research. We live in an age where information is not something one must seek out, but rather one must try to decipher from the barrage of meaningless data. We come to my claim that without the penny press, we may not have had so many overpaid sports stars today. This is because the penny press, in a bid to sensationalize almost everything, began covering sports as a way to enlist the interest of other readers. And it worked. In their book, A Brief History of American Sports, authors Gorn and Goldstein directly credit the penny press papers with disseminating sports news and giving rise to American sporting culture. These articles armed people with information to share and debate in the street and in the taverns. The penny press papers also provided advertising for upcoming events and put it directly in the hands of those likely to attend. This further grew the sport. Henry Chadwick is often referred to as the father of baseball, not because he was a player, in fact he wasn't. Rather, he was a sports reporter for the penny press papers in the mid-19th century. The papers were his outlet, and it is his writing that is often credited with making the game so popular. So how has this led to the salaries of today? Essentially, it is a question of supply and demand. As media has continued to promote sports based on its excitement, market forces are tied to the athletes, and as such, they are able to negotiate huge salaries. In fact, according to Forbes, boxer Floyd Mayweather was able to negotiate payments of over $100 million in the last year alone. Again, I'm not suggesting that the penny press is directly responsible for this, but media coverage has played a role in creating this kind of excess, and back in the mid-19th century is where it all started. But what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that some young people now see sports as a viable career path and set down that path from a very early age. I'm not talking about young Canadian boys and girls skating around on some frozen pond who dream about playing in the NHL someday. I'm talking about kids who, from a professional or at least a scholarship potential, view sports and athleticism as a viable career. Just have a look at what 2 of the 12-year-old students I teach think.
My name is Kenny Jang. I play table tennis, and I am 3rd for under 12 in Canada. Yes, because I have to play every day, so I don't have enough time for other stuff sometimes.
I'm Cole Shepard. I play hockey. I play for the North Shore Winnicott PWA1 team and Team British Columbia. In 5 years, I would probably see myself playing junior A hockey, since my goal is to go to a big college and get a scholarship through hockey and hopefully play in the NHL, or if I don't, I get a good career.
In a nutshell, here's the story. Almost midway through the 19th century, Benjamin Day changed the fate of history with his development of the penny press. His concept was simple. Rather than sell subscriptions or even sell papers in stores, he would sell papers just for 1 penny and sell them out on the street corners for everyone to have easy access to. But it was a volume game, so he needed to sell lots of papers to make it worthwhile. So he changed the way the news was reported. First, he utilized new techniques, everything from interviews and objective journalism to gossip pieces and so on. He enticed a wider range of people into reading the newspaper. Second, he put an emphasis on sports reporting. This idea was to draw in more readers. Both of these have had massive impacts and influences on teaching and learning, as well as society as a whole. And finally, the third major innovation was to include advertisers in a space that was typically free of advertising. And now advertising is almost everywhere you look. In fact, just recently it was announced that advertising on uniforms will be coming to the NHL in the next couple of seasons. All in all, it's not for me to say if these outcomes are good or bad, helpful or hedonistic. I'm just pointing them out. For the Penny Press.